get started, be mindful of time. For those who don't know me, I am Ronnie, your donor egg mom in waiting. And what that just means is I was told by my doctor in order to conceive, my best chances of having a baby was through donor conception. So what I did was I found a clinic. I found 10 clinics exactly. I went and found and advocated for myself. And I found the clinic of that was positive in a sense of basically saying they were rooting for me and hoping that I bring a baby home. So my 10th clinic, which is Utah Fertility Center, is where I found my donor. I ended up cycling her and ended up getting embryos. And so that is where I am in the process. I'm on transfer number 4. And I've had a lot of hiccups, but that's for another day. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to the panel today Alexandria. And Alexandria is using surrogate. So she is the first guest that we've actually had to do via surrogacy. This platform is for women using third-party reproduction. So under that umbrella includes egg donation, embryo donation, adoption, and surrogacy. So I am so excited to hear her journey. And wherever you want to start, I know you said part of your story was you had a child, no problem, and then you had an emergency C-section, and that's where problems begin to arise. So you're facing with secondary infertility, correct?
That's correct. So I'm facing secondary infertility, and I love to sort of bring that into the space because those of us here with secondary infertility, it's sometimes a really like hard um, line to walk on, right? Because you're always in the middle of this feeling of gratitude and grief. You have immense gratitude for the child that you have and that you love, and then you go through grief of this understanding that now you have infertility. And so my journey to infertility was that my son, he was born premature at 34 weeks, and we had an emergency C-section. And, during the emergency C-section, I sort of hit every Black woman's sort of fear of, in the middle of giving birth. I'm being told that his heart rate is dropping and that things were going pretty south pretty fast. And so I was rushed into an emergency C-section. And because my son was at 34 weeks, right, my husband, while he was there and he cared for me, he also was caring for my son, who was then rushed over to the NICU. And so the story does unfortunately start with a little bit of medical trauma of like lying on a bed and in, having a C-section, like you can't move your body, but you can hear everything that is occurring within that amount of time. And now that I look back on it, I was on the table for a really long amount of time. And later when I finally went through and read the paperwork, I lost a good amount of blood during that period of time, because I was pushing my son out and they had to push him back in. And so, we had my son, immense amount of gratitude. And then I started realizing that I was having a lot of pain, like pain for, a year, 2 years. And I was getting sort of like from my OBGYN at that time, you just push out a baby, girl, you're fine. Right. This is so normal. And, I finally took the leap and decided to find somebody else and realized that my pain was not normal. And after a year trying to figure out what that pain was, I had a laparoscopy and hysteroscopy, and we found that I had really severe adhesions that essentially like fuse like part of my bladder and my uterine lining and the uterine wall together.
Wow.
And yeah, so that was then, so it was great. We felt like in that moment, like, okay, right? Like testimony achieved, thank you, Jesus. We'll be good. We'll be able to have a baby. And moving forward, we realized that I was not getting pregnant. We were still not getting pregnant. And from there, we started to do letrozole. We did 6 rounds of letrozole. And finally, we were introduced to an REI, or reproductive endocrinologist. And it was there that she decided to do a hysteroscopy, and we found that I had very severe Asherman syndrome. And the hard part about this is that, one, I had probably the most severe case of Asherman syndrome that she's ever seen. Yeah, like complete, the way that they describe it right now is that like my uterine lining, my uterine wall was completely obliterated. And I never had a DNC. And so the only thing that can really point to that is that something happened most likely during my birth.
Is that because maybe because what was the reason why you pushed him out and they pushed him back in?
Yes, because they stated that because his heart rate was going down, that they needed to push him back in. After trying to receive some more information about that, I unfortunately never heard back from our doctor, even when we went forward to try to receive more information. Which is another story about like for another day of like whether or not we really wanted to push to receive all of the information, which was traumatic within itself. And ultimately, right, again, gratitude and grief, we received our child, which we were very gracious for.
Exactly.
But from other medical professionals, there had to have been some level of scraping that occurred during that. And a significant level of scraping where my endometrium actually at this point cannot reheal itself.
So for those who don't know what Asherman syndrome is, can you briefly describe what it is?
Yeah, so Asherman syndrome is when you have like adhesions and scar tissue that is growing, upon that uterine wall and uterine lining. And there's different, levels of Asherman syndrome. There's some, so in order to receive care for Asherman syndrome, which I was beneficial enough to see an Asherman's specialist. And what it is, it's the scarring that your body does, and the scarring and adhesions essentially cover all of the healthy tissue that is growing over like the uterine lining. And so because of that, you might have difficulty having shedding of that uterine lining, right, which is what you need to do in order to have that healthy cycle, and also what is needed for, healthy implantation, of an embryo. And so the interesting thing about Asherman syndrome is that the more that you talk about it, you find that there's more people who have it,
right?
But the number of like true Asherman syndrome specialists is actually very, very few. So like we're talking about like dozens of Asherman specialists like in our country, and people who travel pretty far in order to find somebody who has specialized in Asherman syndrome, because there's a very specific way to try to remove the tissues that prevent scarring from reoccurring.
That's essentially like a REI. Like there's only about 5 true specialists that deal with come on, girl, immunology. There's only a handful, and the rest in the country that really even deal with that. So yeah, I do know that. Is it something where you have it, or you like endometriosis, you have to be properly diagnosed with it?
So you need to be properly diagnosed with it. And the way that you typically do diagnosis is through a hysteroscopy, which is sort of where things got a little hairy for me, is because I had a hysteroscopy with with my OBGYN, who found the adhesions that came from like my C-section and like the fusing of my bladder. Or at least it is written that I had a hysteroscopy and a laparoscopy. When I moved to my REI and my Asherman specialist, they discovered within my paperwork that my hysteroscopy, that was said to have been done, there was no pathology, there was no finding, there was no paperwork that is trailing to it. And actually, if a hysteroscopy would have been done, we would have seen the really significant scarring probably a year before, right? And we wouldn't have gone the route of doing letrozole, because the issue was not the issue,
Ovulation.
exactly.
Right.
The issue was more around, was the fact that there was scarring, so there would be no implantation, which, girl, let me tell you that got me like Hans from like, from Frozen. I was over here like, wait, there's no findings.
Right.
There's no pathology, right?
Right.
You go from one um, piece of trauma of like your C-section, and then you're like, okay, I found a new doctor, and this is somebody that I've put my life and my heart into, and you're trying to regain trust with somebody, and then you go see another specialist, and you have two other people who come to you, and you're there like, girl, like, I'm not gonna say it, but I will say that there are things that are not there.
Right.
um and uh so a lot of this process has just been through, finding out all of this information along the way. And so for Asherman syndrome, you need to have it diagnosed. It is done through a hysteroscopy. And in hysteroscopy, right, they go in, they take a little bit of the camera. And I have my wonderful, beautiful pictures of my highly scarred uterine lining, which are all completely white because there is no pink
Right.
or tissue that is there.
Right.
Um, but I was blessed to be in the Washington, D.C. area, and there is an Asherman specialist that was close to us. And I will tell you that it is only by the grace of God that I called the first time. And the person on the phone, the receptionist, was like, I think I was calling in June, and they're like, next opening is October.
Right.
Right? Because it's so hard to get in and people are flying in. I immediately hung up the phone. I cry and I'm like, nah, not today. And then I was like, still have to make an appointment. So I picked up the phone again. I called, and she goes, oh, the girl right before you canceled. Can you get in? Can you come in the next day? Literally grace of God. And I was like, yes, please. And of course she's finding out that like my birthday's in March, my husband's birthday is in February. She's like, oh, you're both Pisces. How can you all living together, both Pisces? I'm like, girl, I will talk to you about my astrological sign if you put me into the calendar. um you can confirm that I have this appointment. So that is so that's how we moved into Asherman syndrome. And I did 7 hysteroscopies afterwards with cutting for the removal of scarring. And we removed a really good amount of it. We removed maybe about 80% of it. But even with the estrogen, it seemed as if my lining was not returning, my endometrium was not returning, and we went in for one more appointment of a hysteroscopy, and the doctor was like, if we get this done and we get this, like, everything else is functioning fine, I think we'll be okay. And I woke up from that appointment and it was, you won't be able to carry your endometrium. It, like, even with estrogen, it's pretty obliterated.
Wow.
And of course, my mama was there, right? So like my mom was crying. She's trying to plead to somebody in the back. Somehow she probably broke HIPAA on some type of, sense or whatnot. But yeah, so we found out November 2023. We went from like going in super excited to you would not be able to carry moving
Wow.
forward.
And what were your feelings? Because I know that some kind of way or something in you decided to say, "Let me share my story." So, walk me through the process of you getting this news and wanting to share this news, not to just family, but like publicly to people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started to go through the process of like trying to find a support group, um, and just trying to like better understand like what my options were. Right. Our doctor brought up, a gestational carrier, which is interchangeable with surrogacy.
Right.
But I had never heard of a gestational carrier. I never heard that term before. So I started to research, I started to go through. And one, I noticed that if I Googled the word surrogacy, nobody looked like me in
Right.
any of the photos that were there. You talk about surrogacy and yeah, like, Kim Kardashian comes up or somebody else comes up in this process. And then on top of that, I'm in a very unique camp. And so I would find that I would go to the secondary infertility support groups. And not only was I typically the only person of color, but, in secondary infertility, a lot of them were folks who had done IVF before, or were in the process of IVF with carrying their own child. So I didn't fit really into that camp because I'm like, I can't carry.
Right.
And then if I were to go into sometimes the surrogacy groups, it was still with folks who were engaging in primary infertility. And I wanted to be respectful of those who had not met their baby quite yet. And so I just found that I like really didn't fit into a lot of these camps, and it felt pretty lonely. And this really started out as like a redemption song and story for me of, going through medical trauma and being a Black woman who experienced medical trauma, and trying to find some way in order to get to the other side. So that's sort of what like inspired me to share my journey, and sharing it as a Black woman, sharing it also as a Black woman who is also in her 30s, because I hear a lot of like, you're still young, girl, you got time, right? And it doesn't erase right, the trauma and everything that has gone through it. So that sort of is like what inspired me to continue to go on this journey and to share it.
Now, I found Alexandria in just a Facebook group, and I'm listening to you talk, and I'm like, we have a very similar path of I found myself going from one group to another, and I just didn't quite fit in. And then I knew I was as a Black woman trying to do egg donation. There wasn't very many women doing it, and I was like, all right, I'm just creating a space. Now, did you create that Facebook group? Or you were just in there?
I was just in there. I think that was very early on of just trying to find somebody and to hop in. And I think the other thing is that I was connected. So going through this whole process, even starting to share my story of going into surrogacy and secondary infertility, the people who found me and the people who were like, girl, we're going to help you find your own, believe it or not, were Black surrogates. Because just like there are not a loud vocal representation or present of Black intended parents who are seeking surrogacy, there is also not a lot of outward representation of Black surrogates that are out there. And so, the people who really found me and rallied me were Black surrogates who were like, girl, we're going to connect you to the folks that we know, and we're going to help you find somebody to help, carry your child. And I think it was one of them who had connected me to that group. And that's how, I wound up there.
Okay. Now so did you make a post in there, or you just made it on your regular just social media page? How did your surrogate find you?
Okay. So my surrogate found me on my Instagram page, 5,000 Loaves, and she started following me. And we had just been following for a while, and she actually reached out to me like a month into me like having this into this page. And it was just first like, hey, just want to say that this is really cool, Black surrogate here. I just want to support you upon this journey. And that was in December. That was the first time that we like talked to each other. And then about a month or two later, she was like, I've been praying about this and trying to like bring up the courage to ask you, because I know that you are still looking for a surrogate, and I'd love to talk with you more about this and specifically, connect. Because there's one thing that I talk a little bit more on our page is specifically like this Black surrogacy journey of, for those who are not familiar with surrogacy, the child genetically is mine and my husband's. We have created our own embryo, and so it is my egg and my husband's sperm that is created our embryo, and then that embryo goes into our surrogate. Child is completely genetically ours, and while we would have taken anybody that we had a connection to carry our child, like if it truly felt right. I do talk about on my page that there's something even more something even more deeply rooted and connected for me of potentially having a Black surrogate, right? I always prayed that like my redemption story of the medical trauma of my son's birth, of like doing it again, doing it where I felt like I had a louder voice, where I possibly had, you know, a doula or a midwife, and instead of fear being the first thing that was there, it would have been a sense of joy. And I think I even wrote like a poem that's on there about this idea of like, that's what my redemption story was going to be. That despite all of this, that the next time that like a baby cries and comes into the world, it would be fully and solely full of joy. Um, and while we would have been happy with anyone that we were connected to, there is still this element of that redemption story continuing, because I get to be the voice around this Black woman who is bringing our child into the world, and being able to say in that room, there will only be joy here.
Right.
And there is only joy here for our child. There is only joy here for her. And even though, right, my experience was different, I get to stand up for this woman who is giving us the greatest gift ever, to say, this is what this room will be. And really, like, that full circle and story would only be able to happen with a Black woman in that room.
Wow. When she when she said to you that she wanted to do this, did you think like you've got like this feels
Yes.
to me like a lottery ticket in your hand, that somebody reached out to you and just said, "Hey, I'll do it." And you're like, "Ooh, you for real?"
Yeah, yes. I was, oh my goodness, I was stunned. And also, right, just because of the trauma of infertility, right, you're like, there's no way, right? Something
Right.
good happens and then you take 5 steps back. Some like,
Right.
where's it at me? And so, right, like we were a little nervous, right? You know, I had my friends who were like, what's her name? I'm gonna go find her. Let's see who she is. Like, who is this person?
Right.
You know, shout out to my girls in that way. But um yeah, but and also, right, in our research, you'll find that most people, it takes at least a year at this current point in time in order to find or be matched with a surrogate.
Right.
And that's assuming that your match is somebody who is going to be a good match for you. Because this is the person that's carrying your child, and the things that you have to talk through and be agreed upon is, right, what does lifestyle look like while they're carrying your child? What does compensation look like? What does, um, you know, you having the same understanding around right to life, and whose life and when. Um, and so when she reached out to us, at first it was definitely felt like a pinch me moment.
Right.
And it felt like wait, we're not out of the woods quite yet. Um, but then I had a friend who told me, why can't your moment of rest be now? And if you like, why not? um, and like, why not this moment be like, listen, your body has done enough, and science said that we can take you a part of the way, and some Black woman comes along and says, I'll take you the rest. Like, why can't that not be
Right.
what has happened? And so with that, we you know, I still held my breath. um but then we met and we talked online, and then we did a FaceTime. And in our FaceTime, like, that's when I knew that like this was truly like the best and greatest gift that has ever happened. And that we were going to be a good match for each other.
Now, did you have a when they told you you needed a surrogate? Did you have certain qualities or traits that you look for, and then she just happened to meet them, or did you have like a checklist, or what did you have?
Absolutely. So, you know, so the thing about surrogacy is that you might have a personal checklist. Then there is also just like the standard, you know, ARSM, like the Reproductive Medicine like Association, like they have qualifications on, you know, what is the standard when it comes to surrogacy. And so part of that is, you have to have had a healthy live
Live
birth
birth.
before.
Right.
Um, there is a specific like BMI index. Um, there's other information like around like having to have specific like medical screening. And so there's that. And then our clinic also has their own qualifications, and some clinics, their qualifications are different than the ASRM, like they're a little bit higher. And so we went, yes, based off of like medicine and what those recommendations were. I think for us, the other added on thing that we were looking for and that we were pretty open about is that we wanted somebody who was going to be highly communicative with us. That was extremely important to us. Somebody who was open for us to be a part of, even if virtually, part of appointments. And we really wanted it to be somebody who would be willing to have a lifelong relationship with us if they so felt comfortable. We wanted this to be truly a partnership. And, I told our surrogate, I was like, now you're stuck with me like forever, by the way.
Right.
Like just like that's part of the deal is that you're stuck with me for forever. But we wanted it to be that way. So we went into this as truly a partnership, and truly in some ways a family, because she also has children.
Right.
And we have a child, and it's also sort of exciting to bring these three children together who are a part of this process and having to learn at this process as their adults do it as well.
Right. Now, does she, and I'm going to assume because she reached out to you that she was probably on board to, um, make this, a partnership, or, otherwise she would have just went through like an agency or something like that.
Yeah, so I will say, again, our surrogate has been amazing. She actually broke up with her agency for us,
Wow.
which is insane. We knew that the only way that we probably could afford surrogacy was to go through an independent journey. And for those who don't know, there's different paths within surrogacy. So you can go through an agency, which is where there is, an additional party, company, nonprofit that is supporting you throughout this process. So they have already potential surrogates that they are connected to. And so they will go through the process of helping you find a match. They will support you they will support your surrogate to go through medical screening, and all of the things that they need to do, but then also support you through, legal record review and everything essentially that you need to do through, embryo transfer, but then also throughout the pregnancy. Right. So that way, if there is ever questions with legal, etc. So that's one way that you can go. There's this like third party. And while helpful, and for some folks, they find that it's, provides you the information that you need, right?
And
because
it's very expensive.
And girl, about to bring that up. And I'm glad that you didn't beat around the bush.
No,
and
no.
It is very expensive.
Yeah.
Very expensive.
Yeah.
And, and this again, just my opinion, is it's one of the biggest barriers to accessing surrogacy is because of how expensive it is. And also in some ways takes advantage of like, well, we know the process.
Right.
And to be honest, to fully understand the process of surrogacy, it's like you got to find somebody who has done it before, who can give you the lowdown or the information.
Right.
And so in some ways it like holds on to that fear of like, you don't know all the information. So that's one way. And then the other way is independent, where there isn't this third party and that you yourself is going through the process of navigating the whole surrogacy process on your own. So yeah, so then there's independent. And so we went the independent route. Now I will say, and so for anybody who is looking into surrogacy, there is now these these in-between places that are really trying to build this financial gap of providing information and support without the astronomical overhead of agencies. And so one place is called The Biggest Ask. And I will say we have utilized their support just for me to be able to navigate what comes next, how do we do this,
Right.
and they add some mediation within it, but without again the 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 huge amount of cost that goes within that.
Right.
But we were pretty open of like, we will not do an agency. We cannot afford it. And so for this to move forward, like we did ask her, like, would you be willing to do an independent journey with us? And she agreed. Like she took a leap of faith and hope and trust within us to break up with her agency and to do an independent journey with us. I do think having the biggest ask was beneficial, just so there was just some type of buffer, just in case.
Right.
But ultimately, we stuck down on, we're going to be open and honest with each other as we go through this process. And so she obliged.
I always say what's meant for you is meant for you because, for her to already be in an agency itself,
Right.
and then, she knows the ins and outs of what surrogacy is. So I'm sure she probably helped you as well of
Yes.
what to do as well going through it, because I know I'm not very versed in surrogacy, but I do know independent is the way to go. But you also need to know what you're doing, because this is the reason why you pay for the agency, is because they have all the paperwork you need.
Right.
Um, you're also dealing with different laws. If your surrogate is in a different state, they also have to get, you need to know the laws of what surrogacy is for that state
Yep.
when the child is born. A good lawyer, it's a lot of steps that you need to take in order to do independent, but you're going to pay top dollar for an agency who's going to have all these answers for you. So again, what we say in all of our interviews is self advocacy
Yes.
and reading, studying, every common theme. I think every story that I've had is, girl, I was on the internet.
Yes. Yes. And take advantage of those free consultations.
Right.
Right? Like even with a lawyer, like a surrogacy and art lawyer, take advantage of those those 30-minute consultations and ask some questions, so that way you can write them down and then go and compare. But exactly as you said, on the internet, I had people in my DMs being like, this is what I did, this is how we got there, here's where we cut the cost, here's what we did to be able to afford this and to find people, and truly it has been the community that has supported us through this. Like even,
Right.
something that has been a little bit more scarier in the surrogacy world lately is just, the way that you go about compensation is that you go through escrow, which I only thought was for a house, really did, before I came into this. I was like, escrow for what? Um, but there has been an escrow breach that was pretty big, a couple months ago, and people losing the money that was in escrow.
Oh
And
wow. Oh
so,
yeah. That
yeah.
was the same thing for just houses too, right? So it's the same
Hmm.
similar thing where people were sending wiring money to a random account or whatever, thinking it was their brokerage, and it wasn't.
Yeah. And so this particular place, because there's not many surrogacy escrow places out there. And so this one in particular, um, there was like like thousands of people, and they started to realize that they weren't getting emails back. There was not information about like their of how much was left in their account, to find that like millions of dollars
Wow.
have been utilized, and it's actually going to court, and federal court, I believe, at this current point in time. And so luckily I am part of a community that people were like, I'm a lawyer, and here is how we doctored up um, our contract, so that way only a certain amount of money is in escrow at one time.
Okay.
So then that way you don't feel that you have to put all of this money in there at one time, and God forbid something were to happen to it.
Right. Now, walk us through walk us through walk us through costs. We've talked about egg donation, embryo donation, but walk us through, roughly what you would be looking at, because I know that it can be anywhere between 50,000 to 100,000, depending on agency, depending on how good the surrogate is. You know, first time surrogates are slightly cheaper, but if she's proven she can pop out those babies, she gets more money. So, um, and I also want to ask too about, I know insurance and stuff that you possibly may have to carry on the surrogate as well. So walk us through that, the different costs that you have.
Absolutely. So there is a lot of different costs that go within it. And so I think most people, the thing that they mostly hear about is the base compensation. And the base compensation is the amount that you give to your surrogate for being able to carry your child through gestation, right? And so for a newer surrogate right now, the costs can be, I want to say, or not a newer, but a first time surrogate, it is typically around, I think you're looking at like $45,000. And then for a surrogate who is experienced, because right, they've already gone through medical clearance. Because the thing about your surrogate is, even before you do transfer, they have to have a record review. They have to pass medical screening. And then after medical screening, there is a psychological evaluation that they also have to pass. And then right from there, you're able to go to legal. And so for an experienced surrogate, you could be looking at $60,000 or $65,000. And something that I talk about on my page too is that sometimes, like something to even consider, is for a surrogate of color, right? So here I am, somebody who has experienced medical trauma in a country that has a very high Black mortality rate. And I'm asking another Black woman to do just that, to go into an environment that could potentially be dangerous, depending on where they decide to birth our child. And so do you consider that within costs as well? So that is typically like the base compensation. But on top of that, and to be clear, that base compensation is not paid in one lump sum. That it is paid over based off of a certain number of months or weeks. And so and depending on when the baby is born is based off of like when compensation is provided. And that's something that is determined during the legal system, or your legal contract. But on top of that, you're also looking at insurance, right? So there is sometimes surrogacy-friendly insurance and not, surrogacy-friendly insurance. And if your surrogate does not have surrogacy-friendly insurance, you're also looking at potentially paying for all of those medical costs, right? OBGYN appointments and all that is out of, that would be considered out of network or not to be covered. One thing that we did alongside with our surrogate is that we were open to paying a little bit of a higher base compensation because she had surrogate friendly insurance.
Okay.
And so we knew that we wouldn't incur that extra cost that comes with some of the medical fees, because she has surrogacy friendly insurance. And so we were okay with increasing a little bit of the base compensation. So yeah, but one thing that I will say is that even if somebody tells you that they have surrogacy-friendly insurance, it is always best to have that checked. Right. And there are very specific companies that are out there that have, the gold. So Art Risk is really the biggest one that will check and really give you that information, whether or not that the insurance that your surrogate has is surrogate-friendly insurance.
And that's just to make sure that when they go to the doctor, like it's just like regular just medical insurance, where it's like they're covered underneath maybe co-pays or something like that.
Precisely.
Is that what it means? Okay.
Absolutely, because there are some insurances out there that if you're caring for another, like if this is not going to be your child, but it is for surrogacy, they will not cover it.
Okay, so my employer, if I go tell them I'm pregnant via surrogacy, and I go to the doctor, they may not pay for my visits. Because it's not my child.
That is correct.
Okay. That makes sense. I have seen where some people have kind of done it similar, where there's a girl on TikTok. She carried her sister, so she used her egg and carried it, and she did everything underneath her shirts because it looks like it's her
her
child.
child.
Yeah, right. So I mean, there's ways that people get around it, but
100%.
more importantly, it's just the laws in each state. So if they're not in your same state, because there has to be paperwork when that baby is born to say this child doesn't belong to who delivered it.
100%. And so, I think there's two really important parts that feel super icky, but are also extremely important. And one is the legal process that comes within this, right? It
Right.
protects both parties. And some folks, they're able to do it with, right, their family members and who are able to give that gift. We unfortunately didn't have anybody in our family. I'm the oldest in my family. And to have somebody, who is going to be able to do that for us, we just weren't in that space. But for some, right, the legal process protects both, the surrogate as well as the intended parents. And it very clearly says, like, in our contract that, like, this baby is ours.
Right.
And even once, baby is birthed, if they're in the hospital, all medical decisions immediately would come to myself and my husband. And same as that, our lawyer will receive a post-birth order. So then that way, as soon as our baby is born, my husband and I, it is our names that are on the birth, on the birth certificate.
Right.
And so there doesn't have to be an additional adoption process that comes afterwards.
Now, I don't know how true this is. People say, in the egg donation space, people go, well, what if people drop off their baby and say, to give it to the egg donor? Those are fears that people have,
Right.
as giving their eggs, and then, or the egg donor comes to their door saying, give me my baby. Are there horror stories of families not getting the baby, or the surrogate wanting to kidnap the baby? Like, how true is that?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. So first off, a lot of surrogates have their own children and they don't need another one. They don't
Right.
want another one. So there is that. Um, and then the second piece is that, again, right, those types of horror stories that you might hear might be, again, through some of these unprotected consensual relationships. If you are going into a consensual surrogacy relationship, there is a legal contract, right? And so there is no knocking on my door like, girl, we signed the same paperwork and we sent it in. My name is signed here, your name is signed here, right? And so
Right.
we were both there.
I promise you that lady not coming.
Like, seriously, right? Like, I went to FedEx, it was notarized, I had to pay my notary fee.
Right.
Like,
even if you wanted to give that baby back, girl, no.
right, exactly. Like legally, she would be like, this one's yours. Like,
Right.
and your name's on the certificate.
And truthfully, that is what even we've had. I think like Keisha, she's in our chat, and she I remember she had her cousin donate her eggs to me, and she said, should I compensate her? And I said yes. And a lot of people say, well, they said they'll do it for free, and I said, I don't care what people say, they'll do it for free. You need to give them money, because now it's a business transaction. It now is serious, saying, I gave you money for X, Y, and Z. As much as we want to be cheap about this, there's just some things that we don't need to be cheap about. Now, I'm not saying, I told her, I was like, I'm not saying give your cousin $15,000.
Right.
But what I am saying is you need to give her money.
Yep.
Because now it's like, this is not a gift.
Yes.
Sometimes people take their gifts back.
Yeah.
No, girl, I paid for this.
Right? Like, there is something that's like, yes, special about like altruism and all that goes within this, but also at the end of the day, it is, again, this transaction, there is this consensual contract.
Right.
You are the vessel for my child. Right. And I will say one thing that is great about surrogacy right now, because I get this a lot, is, well, like, everybody's going to see that baby as her baby. And I'm going to tell you right now that, like, at least luckily, like, in the places where I have gone from, like, very much day one, my husband and I, they have turned and they have said gestational carrier, parents.
Right.
And they have turned to us and they have said parents. And even, right, like any paperwork that we said, even when we did, the transfer, it was very much like carrier, gestational carrier, parents. And
Right.
parents, this is the embryo that is being transferred today.
Right.
Parents, this is what you have agreed upon in order to move forward. Like, it is very clear that my husband and I are the parents
Right.
of this child.
And I like that because all medical facilities aren't like that,
Right.
and even like the hospital, I've seen where, you know, they've kind of got crossed with some things. And when you're in this type of space, that can be very triggering in a sensitive
Yes.
area. Because I know for you, um, and I want to segue and talk about, you went from just having your child just naturally the old fashioned way. Now you have to dive deep into what IVF is because you got to do
Yep.
IVF and navigate that space. And then from there to understand and come like, I am not going to carry this child. So, how was the IVF process for you?
Yeah, I think it was. So it was one, it was a whirlwind, right? Because we went into IVF with this idea that we were going to
Right.
do IVF and I was going to carry, right? Like that was the
Okay.
original thought and hope, right? We started in IVF and then it was there that they were like, Asherman syndrome. Um, and so, at first you do all of these things and, you know, going through 7 hysteroscopies. That is seven surgeries. I did a surgery about a month. Um, and some of them were under sedation and some of them were not under sedation. Yeah, so they can now do hysteroscopies where you can have like a very basic, sedative or, like a Valium. But
No,
then
no, no, no.
they
I
are
need my
doing the
meds.
hysteroscopy and the video, like you can actually watch her as she does it. And for some people, that's
Thank you.
really traumatic and they're like, I would never want to do this, right?
No.
For me, as somebody who went through medical trauma, where I did not know what people had done to me, and all I know is that I can't have a kid anymore. Um, that was actually probably one of the most beneficial experiences of being able to sit there.
I like my naps though. I like my
I know,
anesthesia
I'm not gonna lie,
naps.
there were a couple of them. And when I had to do my egg retrieval, those naps were great.
Yeah, I need
I
a nap.
highly enjoyed those. But at the very beginning, it was helpful to like see up on the screen. And I remember her being like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I will be okay if you tell me everything that is happening to me." Right? I will be okay if I feel like I have some level of understanding and knowledge of what is happening to my body at
Yeah.
this current point in time. And right, to go through that process, and we're navigating IVF and we're doing these surgeries for the hope that we could then move forward and do egg retrievals, because Asherman syndrome came first. They tried to um, you know address the Asherman syndrome before we could even go back to our REI to do egg retrievals. And so we went in with one idea, and then our very last hysteroscopy, we left with, okay, still going to have to do IVF of, your egg retrievals. This is still your long road, and you won't be able to carry. And I think the idea of not being able to carry was really difficult for me. It was definitely difficult for me. There was so much grief there of um, of feeling like I didn't have choice. And to feel that even when we got to the point of like, yes, you are pregnant, right? Like even right now, I'm like, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
What do I do during 9 months? Like what does that look like for me? And I have a lot of and especially with somebody, I had felt and gone through that process with my son. There is grief of not only not doing it again, but knowing that I can't do it again because of something that was potentially done to me.
Right.
Um, and it's difficult. It's hard. And it's okay to say that, I have a wonderful relationship with my gestational carrier or surrogate, and she is lovely. And honestly, she is better than me because our process has been fairly long. And every time I would text her, she would say, in divine time. And I'm like, okay, but like yesterday would have been great. Um, but it is hard to know that, right, when they are doing the ultrasound that is on her belly, right, it is hard to know that she is going to, feel that kick, and she is going to have those milestones along the way. And it's okay. Like, it doesn't mean that I'm still gracious. There's still gratitude,
Right.
and grief is allowed to also be there.
Yes. That's what my therapist says all the time. You can do both. You can
Yes.
be happy that you're on this journey. She's pregnant. You can also be sad for yourself too.
Yes.
And those are, you both are allowed to be in the same space 100%.
100%. And then start to find what that looks like for you. One thing about my page is I write a lot of poetry and like and stories and work and things like that. And I have one that I haven't like published yet, but it talks a little bit about like what happens if we do grammar differently. And the reason why it's saying about like doing grammar differently is that like in this country and in this society, we don't have words for a love like this. We just don't. And we don't have words of this like in between space of realizing that when folks say, how is so and so and the baby doing? Right? That when they couple those two people together, that like, while I know what you mean, it is still a little triggering because like, where do I fit in this?
Right.
Like, where am I?
Right.
Like, there are three people here that are involved.
Yeah.
And it is not to the fault of other people, but it just means that we don't have a language to describe what a love like this is. And best believe I'm going to try to help you find that. I will have conversations with folks around it. But it has just made, I think, me like more aware of like what our words and our connections with other mean around it.
Now I follow another girl on Instagram, and she said, she had a surrogate, and she said that, ironically, nobody questioned like her husband like being the father, but
Mm.
everyone questioned her because she ultimately didn't care. And she's like, I don't understand what the difference is because.
Yeah,
And she said they would always ask like, "Are you his mom?" And she's like, either way, if I wasn't, like, I would be his mom, but
pre-
why does nobody ask if he's the father, Do you,
precisely.
are you going through anything like that?
So I haven't heard about like, asking my husband whether or not he would be the father. One thing that I hear a lot, and I think partly it's because people don't realize that the embryo still contains you, right? Like they think that if a woman is carrying, that it must be her genetics. Um,
Well, I'm the opposite because I will be carrying not my
you're
DNA.
not, yes, very good
Right.
point. Yes.
The education, you know. I mean, I feel like this is like the best interview because, you know, you're getting it going, well, it must be her DNA,
Yep.
and then I'm getting like, well, that's not your baby because
But
you
that,
carried it. I'm like, bruh.
yeah, listen, and at some point you get to a point where you're just like, can't you just like, this is just where we are in science. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it can just happen. Just believe
Right.
me, right? Like, if you can believe in miracles, then just believe me.
Just take it to say okay.
Right. And so, I still have folks who, um, who who really don't believe me when I say that it is fully right, like it is my embryo and my DNA. Like, they don't. They're like, there's not like it's her tissue. Like, not like her tissue is not going to go through the embryo into the child. Mm-mm, not how it works. Okay, but like her blood is surrounding. Not how it works. Um, like, and it gets to the point that like this, it creates such a sense of like cognitive dissonance for folks that they want to push in order to make it happen.
Right.
Right? And it's like,
Right.
why can't this child just be mine?
I feel you on this on all perspectives because again, I will be carrying something that's not my DNA, and I'm like, why
Yes.
can't this child just be
Why can't this
mine?
child just be mine?
I love that. I think that we got a couple of egg donor moms. I think they all feel the same way. Why that it's just my baby, okay?
Right? And like, why can't this child just be mine?
And
And
that
let's
just
just
be
call it.
right. Let's just be the end of the story. I don't have to. No, we don't have to explain it because we're kind of the opposite. Okay,
Yes.
so we talk about because basically I would be a gestational carrier. I just get
Yes.
to keep the baby.
Yeah.
Um, but we talk about epigenetics, which is what you said
Mm-hmm.
is tissue. Everything is not my DNA, but sometimes what I do, and this is where I think part of the triggering comes from you, is what she eats, how she goes to bed, how she does everything, her environment, all those different things affect your child coming out. And
Yes.
if she is not eating right, exercising, you know, poor diet, then those things could be expressed on your child, which means that maybe they're a little bit sick because she didn't take vitamins, or maybe,
Right.
you know, her breast milk is not up to par. And so now you have a sickly child because of the things that she did. So we talk about epigenetics, meaning that no, my child is not DNA related to me, but some things may be expressed
Yep.
on them that maybe, you know, she's got freckles and neither one of y'all have freckles. And now your kid has freckles, you know, because of things that they have done. And so, um, we on that thing hold on to that because we're like, now this baby's a part of me. Where I understand from you is like, I don't want you to take nothing from this lady because you my baby. You know, I can see that happening for you going. We don't want epigenetics to work on this time. No, no, no. Let's not let that work on here. And but we hold on to that because,
Of
you know,
course.
because we want that connection or something that, you know, ties you to this child that says, I didn't have this baby in a sense in a conventional way, but I want it to work where God just fixes it and I know that this baby is mine.
Yeah.
And I know that right now there's probably like a bunch of anxiety that you're feeling, but I know probably as soon as they put that baby in your eye, you can be like, you know what? I was just worried about
I
nothing.
was just worried about nothing,
I was
right?
worried about nothing.
And I think this is, you know, when like for us, and it's not the same. There are some folks that they're like, thank you for carrying my child, and like we're done. And you know, my degree is in developmental psychology, and so like I truly understand that epigenetic piece of it. And
Right.
so because of that, that's why we were very clear of like, we want to have a relationship with you,
Right.
and we want to have a relationship with you because we know like it, at the end of the day, what you eat, what you say, your laugh, like that is going to be there with
It
our
is.
child.
Right.
And we welcome that, like at the end of the day, right? Like we're not going to shy away from the fact that like, you know, we oh, let's see, there we go. I think it fixed on my end.
Okay.
um we're not going to shy away from that. Like, um one, right, I have a son that likes to tell all of our business, and so therefore like everybody's going to know that our child, right,
Right.
is going to come via surrogacy. And then also, it I think again, the way, or at least the piece that has really held with me through this, is that there is something especially powerful, I think specifically within Black community, of community. And if you are giving us this biggest gift and you're coming into our community, you're coming into our community.
Right.
And there are things that are out there right now, specifically within surrogacy. Like there's, you know, they say like you can have, you know, your surrogate play your voice, and do things within that. But I think something that I heard somebody else on on one of the other episodes say is that like bonding is different for each and every person, no matter where that child comes from.
Yeah.
Um, and so, right, like once that baby is in your arms, you will find a way, right? Like you're going to find your way to bond. You're going to find the very small and different things that make your relationship special and different. And so, therefore, it will work.
And you also know, having your own child, that bonding doesn't come all it's always right away. That
Mm-mm.
it's a task within itself. So I think that you will know that y'all may not gel, and it's not because they didn't come out of you. It's just
Precisely.
because you're a different person than you were when you first had your first. You have a son, your son.
Yeah.
You're a different person. So and two, it's 5 years ago. You out the game, girl. Like, just to kind of remember, it's like, it's gonna take a minute just to even just get used to things, because now you got a 5, 6 year old, you know,
Right.
that you got to tend to. You didn't have that the first time.
Yep.
So it's just going to be adjustment just in general. Even if this child came out of you, it just would be an adjustment.
It's just different.
And
Yes.
we have to just kind of understand that. Someone in the chat asked, medical malpractice, did you do anything as far as like, um,
Like
a
moving forward,
lawsuits or anything like that?
that's a really great question. So we looked and we pursued. Um, the hardest part that happened for us, and it's funny, there's actually a group out there specifically for Asherman syndrome, and people trying to gather more information when it comes to like lawsuits with Asherman syndrome. Right now, most lawyers will not take Asherman syndrome's cases because of how complex that it can be. And also, in particular, OBGYN cases are probably one of the most expensive to take on.
Right.
And so, because of that, we talked to a few lawyers. We had one who was willing to take the case. And by the time that we got there, I was 7 hysteroscopies in, to be honest.
So it's kind of hard to even prove probably at this point.
And not even that, because something I am good with is holding on to random pieces of paper and putting together binders.
Right.
That is part of my trauma process. Is that I'm very good at gathering information. We had information, we had emails, and I have everything. But it got to the point that it was just so emotionally draining,
Right.
and having to share my story,
Right.
like from a medical perspective, to so many people. It got to the point that it was just wearing on me, and to like then have to do it through a legal perspective where people were then consistently questioning. And to be honest, also like the locations and places of where I am are predominantly with people who are not people of color, which was even more traumatic for me. And so my husband and I made the decision to not pursue after
Yeah.
that 7th hysteroscopy.
And I honestly don't blame you. And if you've never been through any kind of medical trauma or any kind of thing, it is a hard thing of like reliving this whole situation over again, things being a totally different than what you thought it would be. Sometimes it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
It's just not worth it. It's not worth it for your mental health
Right.
to even pursue it. No matter if you were going to get like millions of dollars, sometimes things are just not worth your mental health.
Absolutely. And at some point too, like being on this secondary infertility journey, a lot of times, people would ask me, is it hard to feel like you are missing out on your first child by putting all of this energy of IVF and surrogacy into the child that you don't currently have? And I really had to sit and think about that. And I had like two thoughts that came with that. And one was to go down to a route of, I think of legal and litigation would definitely have kept me from being able to see my son grow.
Right.
Like I would not be in a mentally healthy state. And IVF is already hard and difficult enough. And having to explain to him of like, I am sleeping today or I am
Right.
exhausted. And then comes the second part of this of we have been very honest in developmentally appropriate ways with our son that there were medical things that were happening in this current point, and that we were working hard to move forward. Um, and so there are some days where I say today is I'm not worrying about this at all in order to, to focus and spend time with my son. And then there are some days that, just like if somebody else had a job or something else, and I'm like, daddy's going to spend a little extra time with you today.
Right. And when you did your IVF transfers, how many embryos did you get?
We had 3. So we did 3 transfers and we ended with 3 embryos. And so, and our very last transfer, we ended with 0. It was the most eggs that we were able to receive. It was 14, but we ended with 0. And on that same exact day, was when our doctor also told us that our surrogate was past medical screening. Yeah. Right. So in the same breath, she was like, none this time around. And
say the best for last.
Right. And you're going to pass medical screening. And so, so that was, it was the best description of and in our life, right? And really sitting with and during this whole journey.
And I know that probably is, we know anybody who's done IVF is, I still say no matter what, donor eggs, your regular eggs, they don't prepare you for, oh, we got 14 eggs, and then you go from, well, we just got 1 embryo or no embryos. I'm sorry, you got 14?
And I would have to be like, well, what'd you do with the others? Like, right.
Go get them back.
Go get them back. Like, what did we do? And then sometimes, right, like the very casual conversation, right? Like I remember my doctor, and I love her. I really do. And I just could hear that it came out of her mouth. And I think then she heard it. And she was like, I think it was more about quality rather than quantity. I'm like, homegirl, first off, I got 0. And now you're going to talk to me about quality? Like, right. Not the time. That would be in the follow-up when I'm in a different, state.
Now, do you mind sharing your age?
Absolutely. So I am 32.
Okay. So they would probably, okay, so I can see why they just didn't push you to donor. Because even though you said that last one was 14. How many were you getting before?
So before I was getting closer to 8, and then we switched protocols.
Right. But you're still coming down to one
yes.
or none. So it could be a situation of egg quality, but because you have age on your side. So that is why they probably didn't say for you to do donor, because you're at least getting some and they're a decent quality, based on just you being younger. Girl, me, if I'd have got 1, they'd have been like, yeah, you just need to just do some donor eggs. But I'm 45. And so if I'd have did the rounds, we'd have got 1 or none. They would have probably pushed more to donor, but the age is just on your side.
Yep.
So did you have insurance or anything like that to cover IVF?
So we are a federal government family. And so what we did was, it just happened to be that our coverage started in 2024. And so when we went through this process, we were very close. And then we actually waited until 2024 right. to start the retrieval process. So that way we were able to have some coverage through there. Now, once you move to the surrogacy process, right, coverage all through in there is
not covered.
It's not covered. They're like, oh, another person involved. Now we good. And which has been such an interesting perspective for me. And the reason why that's been such an interesting perspective for me is because I've always asked the question of like, okay, so where does my medical, right? Like if we truly believe that infertility is considered like a medical, right, like disease or need or whatever, like it is written down that I medically am unable to carry a child.
Right.
And I totally understand from like, another perspective, but then ultimately they're like, you've got 2 choices. right? You've got two choices in order to move forward with building your family, or you can, you can try other things. Like other things have come up about potentially doing like PRP and other potential, yeah.
which
And
is a gamut. I
uh,
mean, it's
yes,
experimental. It's not guaranteed. You spend a lot of
precisely.
money, and
And you got to fly or drive
right,
somewhere with somebody
right,
who potentially could do it. And I remember at one point they were like, "Oh, are you going to go do that?" I'm like, I'm not driving anywhere.
right.
Like, where at this point, first off, like you just had me under 7 times.
Yeah,
I'm not driving anywhere for something that's experimental.
right.
Um, and exactly as you said, it's like it's a gamut. And so it gets to the point where you're like, so what are my choices? And
Right.
what is going to be covered or supported? And then if it's not going to be right, then we start talking even more so about access and who gets access, um, to a gestational carrier or surrogacy, if that is how you choose to how you would like to build your family.
And there's some employers that do cover it. Is It's becoming more and more accessible with employers. They are starting to cover it, but I mean, a lot aren't doing. They're not covering the whole thing. They may be covering like 25,000. Some do
Right.
50, but that just scratches the surface of everything that you need when it ends up coming to needing a surrogate. So are we grateful that some employers cover it?
Of
Absolutely. But
course.
just know that if you do need to do the surrogacy route, which is why, many of us who are able to carry, it's not really our uterus, it's our egg quality or eggs, is it's a lot cheaper to get some eggs and then try to
Yeah.
carry yourself. So, you know, because that, and we do also have some egg donor moms who were not able to carry. They did the egg donation, they're not their eggs, and they also didn't carry as well. um but we know that this is why we still get to experience the pregnancy part even though it's not our DNA.
Right.
And so we celebrate that because we know this is just a cheaper option than just to, and even I'm sure they'll tell you just to adopt too. I mean, instead of using it, I know. Just adopt. I'm like, okay, well, just give me $100,000 and
Uh,
I'll just go get a child. So
right.
I
And
mean,
that's a
that's the
whole
whole reason why
nother,
we do it too as well.
it 110%. And the cool thing too, right, is about like, technology at this current point in time. There's another woman that I follow and who I've actually been talking to, and who she has done surrogacy, and she actually also did induced lactation. And so like now there are options potentially, right? And for our adoption families as well to potentially either do induced lactation, or you could
Right.
also just do not just do, but you could also do dry latching, right? There's so many
Right.
other ways to potentially to bond and move forward with your child at this current point.
And I love that we are able to. My tagline is always the same: just the diverse past, just one beautiful destination. Like we all just want to be moms and love on these children, and it doesn't matter how they got here. It's that they're here, they're loved, they're celebrated, and you will figure out whatever you need to figure out in order to make it happen for you and your family. Now, embryo day, embryo transfer. We got three. We got
Yes,
three.
we got three.
We got three.
We call
It's
them. We're
not
like it's the
zero. We
big.
got
It's not
three.
zero. We got the big three, and that's what we've been calling them. We've been calling them the big three this whole time.
How many did she put in? Did you test the embryos, and how many did you do? And what was it like when? Because you're early in the game, honey.
I
I
know.
said, "Are we gonna talk about this in 7 weeks? We're gonna talk about this in seven
We're gonna
weeks."
talk about it. We're gonna talk about it because this is the whole process, right? So like this is
Right.
the whole thing, and there is still very much like fear here,
Right.
and right, because I have people who are like, she's pregnant, yay, trauma gone, right? And you're like, huh, like,
No. No.
and so. So yeah, so we tested all of our embryos. We did do the PGTA testing. And so part of our contract was that we wanted to do a single transfer. That was what she wanted to do as well. Um, And so we transferred one embryo on a Friday the 13th day. And she reached out to me because the way that a lot of this happens is that the nurse will call her so they'll call her to clear her schedule, and then they'll immediately call me afterwards. And they called her and they're like, "You're not superstitious, right?" Because she's like, she wanted a Friday. And so we did it on Friday the 13th in September. And so now we are 7 weeks. We'll be officially 8 weeks tomorrow. We have had one heartbeat confirmation, and then um, our second, uh, our second appointment is actually tomorrow. Yeah,
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm
yeah,
so excited. And I get the thing of we call it cautiously optimistic, you
yes,
know. Especially in this space where everything hasn't we don't have a happy ending yet, you know.
yes.
And we've had couple of women on the panel who have not gotten their baby yet, and so it's hard to kind of be like, "Yay, you can do it too," because I don't
Is
know if
that
we can do it too.
right?
And so I always am grateful that people want to share in this because I'm sure you have anxiety. I'm sure there are fears of, like you've already said, missing out on things that you know you had with your previously with your son. And I always go back to my mom, always just saying the things that she remembered. And this is why I wanted to try to carry, is because even today, me being my age, she still has stories about what I did in her tummy, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just something that I hold on to. And, I hope that, you figure out ways to still bond with your child, even though they're not growing inside of you, because I think that that's important,
Oh,
you know,
100%.
of whatever you do, and that you develop your own stories. Honestly, I feel like you should write some sort of book or something,
So it's
man.
funny, I've put together like, and there's some poems and things that like I haven't put in, but like there's been definitely a collection of stories. And first off, I love that you guys talk about mental health on here all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
so like I've talked a lot about with my therapist. And so one thing is that I've been doing this sort of very strategic nesting in a way,
I like
right?
that.
My because my son is 5, we have accumulated things over the last 5 years, and so we've been going room by room by room by room, and we've been very specific on which rooms of our house that we have started to engage in organizing and throwing some things away, and moving through and reorganizing, and and so we've been very specific about which way do we do. And we know that where we will end, the very last room, would be where baby would potentially go. And it feels at this current point that there isn't as much of a risk, right? Because if something were to happen, right, it was the kitchen, maybe that we went through first. But as we get a little bit closer, we get closer and closer to that destination. Um, and so we've done some very strategic and specific things that have come within our nesting. And one of the first things that we actually got was a watercolor painting of the embryo, because we know that's going to be the very first picture that's going to go up. And and so I think that there's just like so many different ways in order to meet milestones. Um, and the other thing that I do is that I write, 40 weeks in of stories that I can then read 40 weeks out. And that's
Oh
something
my
else that
gosh.
I've put together. And so so I have thought about you for 30 weeks, and I've written things for 40 weeks. And so when you come out, I have already 40 things that I can read to you that I have thought of. And so that's sort of like my special way of still being connected, um, yeah,
We
to
we
that.
had a we had a girl when we were doing like Zoom meetings, and she came and she said that she would do something similar. She would sit in their rooms and sit in the chair um when she would have And she said she would just sit there and she would pretend, like she said, I just would pretend like I was pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And they did the same thing, recordings for the surrogates so that the baby could hear their voice. But I love that you're making, because I think that when you do third party reproduction, you have to make things your own.
Yeah.
You have to make it comfortable for you to do. And whatever it is that gets you to a place of peace, to understand that what I'm doing is okay,
Right.
because we both know that there are a lot of questions and a lot of judgment,
Yeah.
of what do you mean you're doing this? And then instead of embracing it, and I like what you said is, and we've told people that too, people will do whatever they need to do in their mind to make it okay.
Yep.
So them saying whatever they're saying, even though it's triggering, they will say these things and you're like, no, this is what it is, but it doesn't seem right in their brain.
Yeah.
So they make it right in their brain. And this is why this space exists, so that we can have these conversations and you can listen to these conversations and know that whatever route you're taking, it's okay whether people approve of it or not.
Right.
Because I can
Absolutely.
forward you the daycare bill, the grocery bill, and whatever bill that comes with this, because you're going to be in the same situation that all of us are in. Is we got 5-year-olds that we still paying on.
Yes. 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 Absolutely.
So don't tell me, because it's a bill that come in here every month. I don't. You put one in, so that means you got two. That means you got a storage bill, which means you got a daycare bill.
Right.
I pay $89 a month for these storages. Listen.
It's funny. Our son is fine. We have another family that we connected through our church who went through secondary infertility. And they were like, congratulations. Also, your kid is 5, kindergarten. So you just finished paying. So, they're like, sometimes God waits so that way the one bill goes out the door while the other one, while you're starting to pay for the other one.
Because Jesus Christ, every time I'm like, y'all don't even ask anymore. Y'all just take it out.
Yes.
It's just that auto pay for me. I'm like, what?
Yeah. No. And it's funny too, because like they just take it out and they send you a nice little email that says, thank you so much. And you're like, okay.
If anybody has any questions in the chat, I know that I've answered some of them. They wanted to know, about the legal aspect of, did you do anything about that? And then, some of the questions I've asked them. But does anybody have any more questions for Alexandria? I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I don't know a lot about surrogacy. And I know that there are some people who are contemplating surrogacy in general. What would you tell that woman who has been told this news of, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to carry it? What would you tell her as far as getting and navigating this?
Absolutely. I think the first thing that I would say is the best place to receive information is through other people. That is probably the best way that I have received information. And also the second thing that I would say is take a very deep breath, right? So before you Google, because as soon as you Google, you're going to find so much information around surrogacy and first off, whether or not, surrogacy is morally appropriate. You're going to hear all of these things that are out there on the internet. And I want you to take a deep breath. And exactly as you said, that like the way that you get to the baby is the way that you're going to get to your baby. Best resource that I also have out there very specifically is The Biggest Ask. They have great timelines. They have great cost breakdown. And it's all in one generalized, centralized place, and it's pretty up to date. I would say that those are probably the biggest things that we have there. And thirdly, if you do decide to move forward through with surrogacy, the best motto that I've kept in the back of my mind that I've written down, it was like the very first thing I wrote down when I realized that I needed to utilize a gestational carrier, was I wrote, her body is tired. Science got her half of the way. She said, I'll take you the rest of the way. And so use this opportunity of your body needs rest. Allow for it to be rest, and that somebody from your community is coming through and saying, I'm going to help you get there, right? We're going to walk together, right? Because you're the one who's leading the way. But I'm going to help you get there the rest of the way.
I feel like I can use that same advice. I feel like I mean,
Yes.
I think anybody using third party reproduction can use that same advice, that someone is taking you part of the way, but you're going to take it the other way.
Yep.
So I'm opposite. I needed the eggs. They got me that far.
Yep.
I just take it to rest. I bring the baby home. So
Exactly.
I love that. My last question, I asked this. We talk about DNA. We talk about bonds.
Yeah.
And so yours is a little bit different
Yes.
because this is your DNA, but you're not carrying. How do you feel? Because you're not there yet, so you can't really fully say that it's not going to matter. But that same woman who is concerned about bond, because I think that you're still in that same place. What are you doing to deal with it, and what kind of advice would you do? I know we talked about the different
Yeah.
rooms and stuff, but advice would you give them if they were worried about, even though this is my DNA, am I going to bond with my child because I didn't carry it?
Absolutely. And so, I think what I would say is that specifically, or at least something, I'm going to tell you what I tell myself since I'm really still like earlier in this of this process, right? And what I've told myself is that I find this as a unique opportunity that I get to orchestrate the environment that my baby comes in, right? Which is extremely powerful. And specifically as a person of color, I get to stand firmly planted on the ground and watch somebody, and I get to like, I get this overhead view of my baby coming into this world, and I get to say, this is how the environment is going to be. There will only be joy here. There will only be joy here. And because I get to say what is in this space when my baby takes their first breath. And I know that when my baby comes out, I'm still the first set of arms
Right.
that they get to go into. I am still the first thing that they're going to see when they open up their eyes. That that in that situation, it matters that she's carrying our child, because that's what we need. It matters, and the work that she's doing matters. And equally, the fact that it is my arms that my child is going into first, in a space that I have said, this is what this will be, and here's the joy that will be in this room, and there will be nothing else, is equally as important. And so I've now set the standard in the day, and I've set the standard for what the rest of this child's life is going to be. And it will only be joy.
I thank you for your bravery. I thank you for your full transparency. I thank you for entertaining my inbox and saying yes. I got a lot of no's, but I this conversation is something that is not talked about.
Yeah.
And I want to personally tell you that you have helped someone make a decision, make a hard decision that they may not have wanted to do if they not had you not just shared your story.
Yeah.
And we gonna, I just feel like in the next year or so, we're gonna have a lot of babies because of what we've been doing. We've been doing the work because you've been doing the Lord's work too. You know what I'm saying? It's a different space, but we've been, I
Yeah.
mean, the same space.